The airport pulsed with the relentless energy of early morning travelers. Suitcases rolled across tiled floors with purpose, punctuated by the brisk footsteps of passengers rushing past and the echoing announcements about gate changes and delays crackling overhead. Outside, heavy clouds hung low in the sky, casting a gray tint on the airport windows and amplifying the fluorescent glow within. Gate 32 hummed with activity. Yet amidst the chaos, one figure stood with a quiet but undeniable presence. Jasmine Rivers, newly promoted and wearing her captain's stripes for one of the first times, surveyed the scene with a calm, focused expression. In her tailored navy blue uniform, every detail polished and pristine, Jasmine embodied a strength she had fought hard to achieve. Beneath her cap, her dark curls were neatly pulled back, and her gaze held a calm, assured quality that spoke of years of dedication. To Jasmine, today wasn't just another flight, it was a milestone, a testament to every sacrifice and challenge she'd overcome. She was ready to prove herself, even against the stormy skies outside. Across the terminal, Karen Thompson let out a loud, exasperated sigh as she waited at the check-in counter. Dressed in an immaculate white suit and a beige designer scarf, she gripped her handbag as if her life depended on it. Her gaze flickered between her watch and the flight monitor, her expression growing more agitated with each passing second. The delays were not part of her plan. She was a woman who valued punctuality, precision, and above all, control. And right now, she had none of it. As Karen glanced away from the counter, her eyes landed on Jasmine. For a moment, she simply stared, taking in the sight of the young black woman in uniform, the captain's stripes glinting subtly in the bright airport lights. Something in her expression shifted, her mouth tightened, her brow furrowed, and a trace of suspicion crept into her gaze. To her, this sight was unexpected, maybe even unsettling. Unbelievable, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for the attendant to hear, though it was clear the comment wasn't intended for them. The tone of her voice dripped with disdain, as if the mere thought of Jasmine in her position was somehow offensive. Karen turned back to the attendant, her voice thick with sarcasm. I suppose they're just letting anyone fly these days. Jasmine didn't need to hear the words to understand the look in Karen's eyes. She'd seen it before, felt the weight of it in nearly every step of her career. Whispers, doubtful glances, the invisible but suffocating air of disbelief that seemed to cling to her every achievement. Today, on the brink of her first major flight as lead pilot, she felt it more acutely than ever. But she had learned to wear her resilience like armor. Years of training, endless hours of preparation, and countless instances of pushing through doubt had all led to this moment. She wouldn't let someone like Karen diminish her confidence. Not today. Jasmine straightened, allowing herself a small, private smile as she checked her watch. Soon, she'd board the plane, and this fleeting encounter would fade into the background. With one last look at the crowd around her, Jasmine took a deep, steadying breath and turned toward the staff lounge to finish her pre-flight preparations. She didn't notice Karen's eyes following her every step, watching her back with a scrutiny that only grew sharper, colder. As the minutes ticked by, the airport buzzed with its usual anticipation. And over the intercom, a voice finally announced, Flight 294 to New York, now boarding at Gate 32. Passengers shuffled forward, a hum of mixed excitement and impatience filling the space. Karen, now gripping her ticket, gathered her things and strode toward the gate, her posture rigid with annoyance. As she approached the jet bridge, her eyes narrowed, standing at the entryway to the plane, greeting passengers with her steady, welcoming gaze, was Jasmine. Karen felt her stomach twist with a fresh wave of irritation, almost as if the sight was an insult directed solely at her. She slowed her pace, turning to a nearby flight attendant with a look of disbelief. Is she the pilot? She asked, her voice carrying just enough volume to catch Jasmine's attention. The attendant, surprised, nodded with a smile. Yes, ma'am, that's Captain Jasmine Rivers. She'll be flying us today. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She shook her head slightly, disbelief etched into every line of her face. I don't think this is safe, she said sharply, her voice tinged with a high-pitched insistence. I'd like to speak to someone in charge. The attendant maintained her professionalism, but her smile faded just slightly. Captain Rivers is one of our most highly trained pilots. Ma'am, you're in very capable hands. Karen wasn't satisfied. She shot Jasmine a glare, her voice dripping with suspicion. No, I've been flying for years, and I've never seen. She paused, her words heavy with implication. I just don't feel comfortable with this. Jasmine met her gaze steadily, her own expression unflinching. For a brief, tense moment, the two women stood in silent opposition. Jasmine's eyes held a quiet strength, a certainty that needed no explanation. She didn't need Karen's approval, and she certainly wouldn't ask for it. Ma'am, Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm. I assure you, you're in safe hands. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't qualified. She allowed herself a steady, even tone, her gaze never wavering. This flight is my responsibility, and I take that very seriously. Karen's mouth twisted into a smirk, her eyes hardening. We'll see about that, she muttered under her breath as she pushed past, heading toward her seat. But as she settled into her plush first-class seat, her irritation simmered. She cast repeated glances down the aisle, as if expecting Jasmine to slip up at any moment.
For Jasmine.
The encounter was already fading, another subtle reminder of the obstacles she faced. But today was about more than Karen's opinions, more than the quiet judgment that hung in the air like a cloud. Today was about taking flight, about the open skies ahead, and with each step, she held her head high, her heart steady, focused on the journey yet to come. As the boarding line for Flight 294 grew, passengers shuffled forward, glancing at their watches, chatting with travel companions, and quietly preparing themselves for the long journey ahead. The dim lighting of the jet bridge and the quiet hum of the terminal created a calm anticipation that balanced the earlier morning chaos. Karen Thompson, however, was anything but calm. Settling herself into her first-class seat, Karen arranged her belongings with meticulous care, each movement radiating irritation. She placed her designer handbag precisely in the seat beside her, snapped open a hardcover novel she had no intention of reading, and cast an eye toward the open cockpit door, a small frown etching her face as she watched Captain Jasmine Rivers preparing for the flight. Karen's mind churned, her earlier encounter with Jasmine lingering like an itch she couldn't scratch. Moments later, a young mother and her son took the seats across the aisle from her. The mother, carrying an array of snacks and coloring books, helped her son settle in, fastening his seatbelt with a gentle smile. Karen glanced over, her eyes briefly softening at the sight of the boy's wide, excited eyes. But her attention quickly shifted back to Jasmine's figure as she moved through the cabin, greeting passengers with a warm, professional smile. With every exchange, Karen's suspicion deepened. As the young mother leaned over to adjust her son's seat, Karen couldn't resist. Can you believe they'd let just anyone fly these days? She whispered to the mother, her tone filled with hushed outrage, as though sharing a scandalous secret. The mother blinked, slightly taken aback, then looked toward the cockpit, realizing what Karen was implying. Her expression shifted from surprise to quiet irritation. Actually, she replied, her tone firm but polite, I trust the airline to hire qualified professionals. I'm sure we're in good hands. Karen pursed her lips, unsatisfied. We'll see, she muttered, folding her arms tightly and casting another pointed glance toward the front of the plane. As the rest of the passengers filed in, the cabin's atmosphere was marked by a calm hum, but Karen's discontent simmered just beneath the surface. She glanced around, gauging the other passengers' reactions as if expecting them to share her unease. But most passengers settled in comfortably, some with headphones on, others engrossed in magazines or setting up their tablets for the flight. If anyone else shared her discomfort, they certainly didn't show it. Finally, the flight attendants completed their rounds, securing the cabin and preparing for takeoff. Jasmine and her co-pilot, Frank, sat in the cockpit, running through their final checks. The flickering lights of the control panels and the steady rhythm of switches clicking into place gave Jasmine a sense of calm focus, a rhythm she had grown to love. The storm clouds outside hinted at turbulence, but her mind was steady, her thoughts aligned with every protocol she had drilled into herself over years of hard work. In the cabin, Karen's irritation only grew. She shot glances at the flight attendants, noting every movement, every gesture. When one of them passed by her seat, she seized the opportunity. Excuse me, Karen said, her voice edged with impatience. The attendant, a young man with a courteous smile, turned to her. Yes, ma'am. Karen gestured toward the front of the plane with a slight lift of her chin. Is that woman really the pilot? The attendant's smile faltered, but only for a fraction of a second. Yes, ma'am, that's Captain Rivers, and she's one of our most experienced pilots. Karen's lips thinned into a straight line. I just don't think it's safe, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as if confiding a grave concern. I've been flying for years, and I've never seen, well, someone like her as the captain. The flight attendant's polite smile returned, but a hint of firmness crept into his voice. Captain Rivers is more than qualified to fly this plane. She's completed extensive training and has an exemplary track record with the airline. Track record or not, Karen muttered, crossing her arms tightly. I don't feel comfortable. I'll be filing a complaint about this. The attendant nodded calmly, clearly accustomed to dealing with difficult passengers. You're welcome to share any concerns you may have after the flight, ma'am, he said, his tone professional but cool. But I assure you, Captain Rivers is entirely capable. Karen shot him a narrowed glance, a challenge in her gaze. We'll see if I make it to the end of this flight without saying something more, she retorted, settling back into her seat with a sigh of exaggerated exasperation. Across the aisle, the young mother looked up from helping her son with his seatbelt. She'd overheard enough of the exchange to piece together Karen's complaints. Her gaze met Karen's, her expression unwavering. You know, she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. I think it's incredible that we have someone like Captain Rivers flying this plane. My son already looks up to her. It's not every day he gets to see someone who's worked that hard achieve something so impressive. Karen scoffed, an eye roll punctuating her irritation. Someone to look up to? She muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We'll see about that. Without another word, Karen turned away, but her frustration simmered. She closed her eyes and leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms in a gesture of indignation. To her, this flight was turning into an unsettling social experiment, one that placed her in what she felt was an unacceptable situation. As the boarding announcement concluded and the passengers settled in, Jasmine's voice came over the intercom, calm and steady. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Rivers. We're preparing for takeoff shortly, so please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your personal items are stored. We're anticipating some turbulence as we pass through a storm system, but my co-pilot and I will do our best to ensure a smooth and safe journey. Thank you for flying with us. Her voice held a quiet authority, each word delivered with confidence. And for most passengers, her message was reassuring. But for Karen, the announcement seemed to amplify her anxiety. She shifted in her seat, her jaw clenched as she cast another suspicious look toward the cockpit door. The young mother watched Karen's obvious discomfort with a hint of exasperation but chose to focus instead on her son, whose wide eyes sparkled with curiosity. As the plane began to taxi, he clutched his mother's hand. Eyes glued to the window, the plane rumbled forward, picking up speed on the runway, and within moments, it lifted gracefully into the air, defying gravity as it climbed into the stormy sky. Jasmine's hands were steady on the controls, her mind clear and focused. She felt the familiar thrill of takeoff, the quiet strength that surged within her every time she guided a plane into the open sky. For Karen, however, each moment felt heavier, her unease intensifying with every second in the air. She glanced at the young mother across the aisle, who was smiling encouragingly at her son. The ease on the mother's face seemed almost unnatural to Karen, as though everyone but her was blind to the danger she was convinced they faced. The irony of the situation gnawed at Karen, each smooth movement of the plane serving as an unspoken rebuttal to her simmering doubts. But as she settled in for the journey ahead, her grip on the armrests only tightened. Unbeknownst to her, she was about to learn far more about herself and the strength of those around her than she could have ever anticipated. The plane ascended, cutting through the dense clouds in steady ascent. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, creating a comforting backdrop that soothed most of the passengers into calm anticipation. But Karen sat stiff and restless, her gaze locked on the cockpit door as if waiting for it to swing open and reveal a more acceptable pilot. She cast a furtive glance at the other first-class passengers, searching for any sign of shared discomfort, but all she found were relaxed faces and polite nods. As the plane leveled off, Jasmine settled into her role, feeling the familiar rhythm of commands and adjustments guiding her hands as she coordinated with Frank, her co-pilot. Years of training, the hours upon hours spent refining every move, every reflex, it all came together in this moment. She'd earned her place in the captain's seat through more than hard work alone. Perseverance, resilience, and determination were what kept her steady now, even with the knowledge that passengers like Karen doubted her every move. Inside the cabin, the flight attendants began their service, offering drinks and snacks, their voices cheerful and welcoming. Passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and settled into their seats, the lull of cruising altitude bringing a sense of ease. Yet Karen's tension had not subsided. Every small bit of turbulence, every bump, made her grip her armrests tighter, her knuckles turning white. A flight attendant approached Karen, offering her a glass of sparkling water. Karen eyed it for a moment, then leaned forward conspiratorially, her voice lowered but still firm. "I need to ask you something," she said, fixing the attendant with a hard stare. The attendant, a young woman named Sophia with a patient smile and a calm demeanor, nodded. "Of course, ma'am. What can I help you with?" Karen gestured toward the front of the plane. "How long has she been a pilot?" she asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. "I mean, really, how experienced is she? I've flown enough to know when someone looks out of place." Sophia's smile faltered slightly, but her professionalism remained. "Captain Rivers is one of our best, ma'am. She's been with the airline for years and has a perfect record. You're in very capable hands." Karen pursed her lips, unsatisfied. "It's just, I can't understand how the airline could take such a risk. This isn't about her qualifications. It's about—" She hesitated, her words hanging in the air, unfinished yet unmistakable. Sophia's eyes held a glint of restrained patience. "I assure you, ma'am, Captain Rivers is here because she's earned it. If you have further concerns, I'd be happy to note them, but I can guarantee you there's nothing to worry about." Karen gave a tight-lipped nod but didn't hide her skepticism. As Sophia walked away, Karen glanced around, muttering under her breath, "I don't know how they think this is appropriate. Social experiments have no place in the sky." Across the aisle, the young mother with her son glanced over, catching the tail end of Karen's complaint. She watched Karen with a mixture of pity and restrained irritation, her gaze lingering until Karen, feeling the weight of her stare, turned to meet her eyes. "Excuse me," the mother said gently, her voice soft but firm. "I don't think you're being fair." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" The mother's face softened, but her gaze held steady. "This isn't a social experiment. Captain Rivers earned her place. My son is excited to be on a flight with a pilot like her. It gives him someone real to look up to." Her words were quiet, but there was no mistaking the conviction behind them. Karen's eyes narrowed. "You can trust whomever you want," she replied, her voice curt. "But I believe in standards, and I have a right to feel safe." The young mother opened her mouth to respond but then paused, glancing down at her son, deciding not to fuel Karen's frustration. She turned back to her son, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Her silence only seemed to fan the flames of Karen's growing indignation. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Jasmine and Frank monitored the radar closely, watching as patches of dark clouds loomed ahead. The storm that had delayed their departure was still sitting just outside their path, forcing Jasmine to make careful calculations to avoid the worst of it. Frank shot her a glance, his expression reassuring. "Everything's steady up here, Jazz," he said, using her nickname with a supportive grin. "We're right on track." Jasmine nodded, her gaze fixed on the instruments. "Good. Let's keep it that way." She took a calming breath, feeling the weight of responsibility but also the satisfaction of being in control. Every turn of the wheel, every slight adjustment, it all reminded her of why she'd pursued this career in the first place. Back in the cabin, the seatbelt sign flickered on with a faint chime, signaling that they were approaching a patch of turbulence. Most passengers fastened their belts without a second thought, their attention drifting back to their screens or books. But Karen tensed, her fingers wrapping around the armrests as if bracing herself for disaster. The plane hit the first pocket of turbulence, and a gentle jolt ran through the cabin. Passengers felt the familiar shudder, some murmuring softly, others unperturbed. Karen, however, stiffened, shooting a panicked look toward Sophia, who was making her way down the aisle to ensure everyone was buckled in. As Sophia approached, Karen raised a hand, waving her over with a pointed look. "Are you sure the captain can handle this turbulence?" she demanded, her voice edged with a slight tremor. "This doesn't feel safe." Sophia maintained her composure, her voice calm and professional. "Ma'am, turbulence is perfectly normal, especially with storm systems nearby. Captain Rivers and our crew are fully equipped to navigate it safely. Please just keep your seatbelt fastened, and we'll be through this shortly." Karen's face twisted with indignation. "I've flown through turbulence before, and it's never felt like this." Her voice grew louder, causing heads to turn in her direction. "I don't know why they would put us in this position. I'm not willing to risk my safety for someone who clearly isn't ready." A few nearby passengers exchanged glances, their expressions ranging from discomfort to annoyance. The young mother across the aisle caught Karen's eye again, her own face showing a flash of frustration. "Ma'am," Sophia said firmly, her patience visibly fraying. "We understand your concerns, but please remain calm. Captain Rivers is fully trained to handle any situation." Karen's gaze hardened, her voice dripping with scorn. "We'll see about that," she muttered, her voice just loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. As the turbulence continued, Jasmine and Frank worked with seamless coordination, making adjustments to smooth the ride as much as possible. The bumpiness would subside soon enough, but Jasmine could sense the weight of the atmosphere inside the cabin even without seeing it. She was no stranger to skeptics and critics, but today, with a passenger like Karen on board, the pressure seemed unusually intense. Back in the cabin, another bump sent a small shiver through the plane, and Karen's grip on the armrests tightened. She muttered something under her breath, her irritation bordering on anger. Around her, passengers began to cast her subtle glances, some visibly growing weary of her constant complaints. The man seated a few rows ahead finally turned, unable to hold back any longer. "Ma'am," he said, his tone polite but firm, "I think you're making more of this than it is. If you just relax, I'm sure everything will be fine." Karen shot him a look of disbelief, her tone tinged with contempt. "Excuse me, but I didn't realize safety concerns were just complaints now," she snapped, crossing her arms. "If you want to put your life in someone else's hands, that's your choice, but I paid for this seat, and I have a right to feel safe." The tension thickened, an unspoken standoff settling over the first-class cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others glanced around, clearly hoping for an end to the disruption. Sophia gave Karen one last look, her patience worn thin. "Please try to enjoy the rest of the flight, ma'am," she said softly before walking away to tend to the other passengers. Karen huffed, her displeasure radiating with every shallow breath. But as she glanced around, meeting the disapproving eyes of her fellow passengers, a hint of uncertainty flickered in her gaze. For a moment, it was as if she was searching for validation, for someone to echo her concerns. But no one did. All she found was a wall of silence, a silence that slowly, reluctantly, forced her to question the reality she'd constructed for herself. The plane cruised at 35,000 feet, but the cabin's tension only continued to climb. The storm clouds outside loomed larger, their edges a deep, foreboding gray as distant lightning flickered along the horizon. Inside, the passengers were settling in, some dozing off while others chatted quietly or scrolled through their phones. For most, it was an ordinary flight with the occasional bump from turbulence, a minor inconvenience that barely registered. But Karen Thompson was in no mood for minor inconveniences. Her irritation had intensified with each passing moment. She shifted restlessly in her seat, throwing pointed glances at the flight attendants as if daring them to come over. Finally, after another slight dip from turbulence, she couldn't hold back any longer. She raised her hand, signaling for a flight attendant with exaggerated insistence. Sophia, already braced for another complaint, approached with a polite but visibly strained smile. "Yes, ma'am? Is there something I can assist you with?" Karen leaned forward, her voice a harsh whisper that somehow managed to carry across the cabin. "I still don't feel comfortable with this pilot," she said, the words laced with a deep-seated indignation. "I don't think someone like her should be flying this plane." Sophia's smile faded slightly, but her professionalism remained. "Ma'am, Captain Rivers is fully qualified, and we're all in safe hands. Please try to relax and enjoy the flight." Karen's lips pressed into a thin, tight line, her irritation bubbling over. "Relax?" she hissed. "I paid for this ticket, and I have every right to feel safe. If I'm going to risk my life for some diversity quota, I'd like to know about it in advance." The quiet hum of conversation in the cabin stilled, and a few heads turned, glances darting in Karen's direction as passengers exchanged uneasy looks. Sophia's expression grew more serious, her tone firm but calm. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice. Your comments are making other passengers uncomfortable." Karen's face reddened, her mouth twisting in disbelief. "Unbelievable. Now I'm the one being disruptive? This is about my safety." Her voice grew louder, carrying across the first-class cabin and catching the attention of passengers several rows back. Across the aisle, the young mother with her son couldn't take it anymore. She leaned forward, her expression resolute but controlled. "With all due respect," she said, her voice clear and steady, "maybe you should trust that the airline knows what they're doing when they select their pilots." Karen turned toward her, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and disdain. "Oh, don't play that card," she snapped. "You know exactly what I mean. If they want to put someone like her in charge to make a statement, fine, but not at my expense." The mother's eyes narrowed, her face a mixture of disbelief and disgust. "Someone like her? Why don't you just say what you mean?" Karen scoffed, folding her arms tightly over her chest. "If the airline wants to pander to political correctness, they should at least inform us. I have the right to feel safe. And this is nothing short of reckless." A murmur of disapproval spread through the cabin. Several passengers shot Karen reproachful glances, and one man, seated a few rows ahead, turned around, his face tight with irritation. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but unmistakably frustrated. "We all heard you. If you're so uncomfortable, maybe you should take it up with customer service after we land. But right now, the rest of us would like to have a peaceful flight." Karen's eyes blazed, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sorry, but I didn't realize safety concerns were now considered complaints." She shot him a glare, folding her arms in defiance. "If you want to trust your life to an unqualified pilot, that's your choice. But I paid for this ticket, and I'll say what I like." Sophia stepped forward, her patience now visibly frayed. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to calm down," she said, her tone firm. "Any further disruption could result in consequences." Karen's mouth dropped open, her eyes widening with incredulity. "Consequences?" she repeated, her voice trembling with rage. "So, I'm the problem here? This is what happens when standards are compromised. This entire flight is a joke." The mother's young son, watching the scene with wide, uncertain eyes, whispered to his mother, "Why is she being so mean?" The mother gave him a reassuring smile, leaning close to murmur softly, "Sometimes people just don't understand that everyone deserves respect." Karen heard the mother's words and her face twisted with anger, her voice rising even louder. "Respect? How am I supposed to respect someone who doesn't even deserve to be up there?" This time, a collective murmur of disapproval rose from the passengers around her. Several people exchanged exasperated looks, while others shook their heads, visibly uncomfortable with Karen's outburst. One of the flight attendants, a tall man with a steady, no-nonsense demeanor, approached. His voice was calm, but his eyes held a warning. "Ma'am, I need to remind you that we're all here to have a safe and comfortable flight. I'm going to ask you to refrain from further comments or actions that might disrupt the experience for other passengers." Karen glared at him, her voice defiant. "Oh, so now I'm supposed to stay silent? I'm being told to sit here quietly while everyone pretends this is normal." The attendant's expression remained impassive, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to remain in your seat and to respect the other passengers. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we'll have no choice but to report your behavior." Karen's face turned bright red, a mix of fury and indignation flashing across her features. She sat back in her seat, muttering to herself, her gaze fixated on the cockpit door as if her anger alone could will it open. Meanwhile, Jasmine was fully focused on her responsibilities. In the cockpit, she and Frank navigated carefully, maneuvering around the storm's worst patches and keeping the ride as steady as possible. Frank glanced over at Jasmine, noting the calm concentration in her eyes. "Just a few more rough spots, and we should be clear," he said, offering her a supportive smile. Jasmine nodded, her voice steady. "Thanks, Frank. Let's keep it smooth." But even as she focused on her work, she felt the tension pressing in from the cabin, the knowledge of the unrest behind her like an invisible weight on her shoulders. She'd been here before, faced doubt and judgment that had nothing to do with her abilities. And yet this time was different. This was her first major flight as lead pilot, and she wanted to prove, if only to herself, that she deserved to be here. In the cabin, Karen's frustration had reached a boiling point. Another slight dip from turbulence made her grip the armrests, her knuckles white, her anger simmered, her face flushed as she looked around, her eyes meeting the stares of passengers who had long since grown tired of her complaints. The plane was quiet, but the tension was thick, like a storm brewing just below the surface. Then, without warning, Karen unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, ignoring the seatbelt sign flashing above her. Her movement drew the immediate attention of the flight attendants, who quickly approached, blocking her path down the aisle. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," Sophia said, her voice firm and unyielding. Karen shot her a furious look, her voice filled with righteous indignation. "Do you think I care what that so-called captain wants?" she snapped. "She shouldn't even be up there. This entire flight is a farce. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's normal." Sophia took a steadying breath, her gaze unwavering. "Ma'am, you're causing a disruption, and this is your final warning. If you don't sit down, we'll have no choice but to restrain you." Karen's face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, so now I'm the problem? You're all so afraid of saying the truth, of admitting that someone like her has no business in that cockpit." Her voice cracked with hysteria, her words echoing in the shocked silence that had fallen over the cabin. The young mother across the aisle watched the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and anger. She looked down at her son, her hand gently covering his, a quiet strength in her eyes as she whispered words of comfort. At that moment, another passenger, a man seated a few rows back, rose to his feet, his face hardening as he addressed Karen. "Enough," he said, his voice firm. "You've said your piece. Now, please, let the rest of us have a peaceful flight." Karen's face flared with anger, her voice trembling as she glared at him. "You have no right to tell me what to do." But before she could say anything more, Sophia stepped in, her voice calm but with a clear authority. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to sit down immediately, or we'll be forced to report your behavior upon landing." The finality in Sophia's tone left no room for argument. Karen's face contorted in rage, but she could feel the weight of every eye in the cabin on her, watching, waiting. Slowly, reluctantly, she sat back down, her mouth pressed into a thin line, muttering bitterly under her breath. As she fumed in silence, the passengers around her exchanged relieved glances, and the tension that had filled the cabin seemed to ease, if only slightly. Back in the cockpit, Jasmine and Frank continued to navigate through the storm, their hands steady on the controls as they guided the plane forward. The turbulence was rough, but Jasmine's focus was unbreakable. She wasn't here to prove herself to people like Karen. She was here to fly, to do what she had trained for, and to do it well. And as the storm began to break, revealing the clear skies beyond, she felt a quiet sense of triumph, a reminder that no matter what challenges lay in her path, she would continue to rise above them, undeterred and unshaken. The storm clouds outside had thinned, but the cabin was still tense, as if the air itself held its breath. The turbulence had subsided, and the fasten seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft chime, allowing passengers a moment to stretch and relax. Yet Karen remained tightly wound, her eyes still fixed on the cockpit door. Every attempt to ignore her unease had only made her resentment fester, feeding her belief that the crew and passengers were ignoring a glaring risk, one that only she seemed brave enough to acknowledge. Jasmine, meanwhile, had settled back into a calm focus. With the roughest patches behind them, she shared a brief, reassuring glance with Frank, her co-pilot. Despite the tension she'd sensed earlier, Jasmine felt a growing confidence, a silent but powerful reminder of the years that had prepared her for this moment. But Karen was far from settled. She sat brooding, and the calm only made her more determined to make her point. Her fingers drummed a restless beat on the armrest as she weighed her options, her frustration mounting until it was unbearable. Finally, in a burst of defiance, she unbuckled her seatbelt and rose from her seat. This time, Sophia's patience had run dry. The young flight attendant intercepted Karen immediately, her calm expression replaced by a firm, no-nonsense look. "Ma'am, please remain seated. The captain has asked everyone to stay in their seats." Karen's eyes flashed with outrage. "I've had enough of this. I demand to speak to someone in charge. This is my right as a passenger, and I will not be silenced." Sophia's voice held steady, but there was an edge of finality to it. "Ma'am, Captain Rivers is the person in charge, and she's responsible for everyone's safety, including yours. You need to sit down." Karen's face turned an angry shade of red, her voice rising to a near shout. "I don't need a lecture from you. This isn't safe, and everyone's just ignoring it. I've never seen such reckless." She cut off as she saw more passengers turning to look, their expressions a mixture of shock and discomfort. But Karen's fury only grew, her gaze fixed on Sophia with a fire that bordered on hysteria. In the cockpit, Jasmine and Frank could hear the muffled sounds of the commotion, and Frank shot her a concerned glance. Jasmine's face remained composed, though a flicker of tension passed over her eyes. "Want me to handle it?" Frank offered, his tone gentle. Jasmine took a steadying breath, her hands firm on the controls. "No, we need to keep things calm up here. They'll handle it in the cabin." She kept her focus, reminding herself that the best thing she could do was stay professional, stay composed. The crew was trained for these situations, and she trusted them to keep order. Back in the cabin, Karen's defiance had reached a crescendo. She stepped forward, raising her voice as she pushed past Sophia. "Open the cockpit door. I have every right to know who's flying this plane, and I demand an explanation, right now." Sophia and another flight attendant stepped into her path, their expressions both calm and unyielding. "Ma'am, please lower your voice and return to your seat, or we will have to take further action. This is your final warning." Karen glared at them, her chest heaving. "Further action?" she scoffed, her voice thick with condescension. "You think you can intimidate me? I paid for this flight, and I expect a captain I can trust." "Not." She gestured in the general direction of the cockpit, as if Jasmine's presence itself was somehow offensive. "Not some inexperienced." "Affirmative action higher." Gasps rippled through the cabin, and a silence fell over the passengers, thick and heavy. Several people exchanged wide-eyed glances, some openly staring in disbelief. The young mother across the aisle clutched her son's hand, shielding his eyes as she looked away, her face tight with controlled anger. Karen, oblivious to the shock and dismay her words had caused, crossed her arms defiantly, her gaze fixed stubbornly on the attendants in front of her. Her anger was no longer simply frustration. It was a kind of crusade, one fueled by a sense of righteousness that left no room for doubt or reason. The flight attendant's voice grew firm, a new edge of authority cutting through her earlier patience. "Ma'am, you have left us no choice. Please sit down, or we will be forced to restrain you." But Karen was beyond reason. Her indignation flared, and she raised her hand, her voice a furious shout. "This is a violation of my rights, and I won't be treated this way. Open that door now." Without warning, she swung her hand forward, connecting with Sophia's arm in an angry, "Wilt gestieren." The slap resounded through the cabin, and for a moment, everyone froze, stunned by the sudden escalation. Sophia recoiled, her expression one of shocked disbelief. Her cheek was flushed from the impact, but she held her composure, her gaze unwavering as she straightened herself. "That's it," Sophia said, her voice icy with resolve. She looked to the other flight attendant and nodded. "Please retrieve the restraints." The other attendant quickly complied, returning moments later with soft restraints designed to prevent further disruption. Karen, realizing she had crossed a line, struggled against them, her face a mixture of fury and panic. But the attendants moved with practiced precision, guiding her firmly back to her seat and securing her arms. As Karen thrashed briefly, muttering under her breath, the other passengers stared in stunned silence. Phones appeared, quietly capturing the scene, and murmurs spread as disbelief and relief filled the air. A man seated nearby leaned back, his voice low but resolute as he addressed the person beside him. It's about time someone did something. Across the aisle, the young mother watched with relief, whispering to her son as he looked on in confusion. Sometimes, people forget that everyone deserves respect, she murmured, brushing a comforting hand over his shoulder. In the cockpit, Jasmine remained focused, her gaze steady on the instruments as she navigated the skies. She could feel the weight of the cabin's tension behind her, the echo of Karen's disruption like an unspoken challenge. But as she adjusted the plane's course, her determination only solidified. This flight was hers, and no amount of anger or doubt could change the work she had put into reaching this moment. As the plane settled back into quiet, the passengers began to relax, some exchanging murmurs of relief. One man, seated a few rows back, turned to the young mother, nodding in solidarity. "People like that," he said, shaking his head. "Sometimes they just can't let others live." The mother nodded, glancing down at her son with a small smile. "All we can do is show them something better." With Karen restrained, the rest of the flight passed in relative peace. The tension that had filled the air like static began to dissipate, and gradually, the passengers returned to their own worlds, some reading, others chatting quietly, and a few drifting into the comfort of sleep. In the cockpit, Jasmine guided the plane smoothly, each adjustment a reminder of her skill and her right to be exactly where she was. She had faced obstacles before, countless moments of doubt, comments from strangers and colleagues alike that questioned her place. But each time, she had met those challenges with the same quiet resilience. She wasn't here to prove herself to people like Karen. She was here because she belonged. As the plane began its descent, Jasmine's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rivers. We're beginning our descent and will be landing shortly. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Thank you for your patience, and we hope you had a safe and comfortable journey." In her seat, Karen sat fuming, her pride bruised but far from broken. She glared at the passengers around her, still convinced that she had been wronged. But the murmurs, the sidelong glances, and the quiet satisfaction on the faces of those who had witnessed her outburst told her a different story, one she wasn't yet ready to accept. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, the familiar voice came over the intercom once again. "Thank you for flying with us today. We appreciate your cooperation. And on behalf of myself and the crew, we hope to see you again soon." The landing was smooth, perfect touch on the runway, and as the fasten seatbelt sign flickered off, the passengers began to stand, gathering their belongings with a collective sense of relief. Karen, still strapped to her seat, watched as airport security personnel entered the cabin, moving toward her with calm but purposeful steps. Her face flushed with indignation as they undid her restraints, preparing to escort her off the plane. "This is a mistake," she muttered, casting one last look around the cabin. "I'll have your jobs for this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." But as they led her down the aisle, the other passengers watched with quiet satisfaction, some openly relieved, others whispering among themselves. The young mother offered her son a gentle smile, holding his hand as they prepared to disembark. As Jasmine and Frank completed their post-flight checks, they exchanged a nod, a silent recognition of the events that had unfolded. Jasmine allowed herself a small smile, a glimmer of quiet pride shining through. She had stayed true to herself, upheld her responsibilities, and risen above the doubt that had tried to shadow her achievement. As she stepped out of the cockpit, the few passengers lingering at the door offered her quiet words of thanks and admiration. One by one, they filed past, some with words of encouragement, others with grateful smiles, each a quiet testament to the impact of her resilience. And as she walked through the terminal, surrounded by the hum of travelers, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that she wasn't just a pilot. She was a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength that lies in every moment of doubt overcome, every whisper of judgment silenced by courage. For Karen, this flight would be remembered as a loss of control, an exposure of her own prejudice. But for Jasmine, it was a victory, a triumph over doubt, a moment in the sky that marked her place, one she had rightfully earned and would continue to defend, soaring higher than those who would try to pull her down. As Flight 294 taxied to the gate, a collective sense of relief filled the cabin. Passengers stretched and gathered their belongings, stealing glances at the cockpit door where Captain Jasmine Rivers was conducting her post-flight checks. Those who had witnessed Karen's outburst felt a renewed respect for the calm professionalism that Jasmine and the crew had maintained in the face of such blatant hostility. Karen, however, sat stone-faced in her seat, her hands tightly folded in her lap, still nursing her wounded pride. Though restrained no longer, the shame of being subdued in front of other passengers felt like a burn that refused to fade. She glanced around, looking for a trace of sympathy, but all she met were averted eyes and tense expressions. The plane came to a complete stop, and the fasten seatbelt sign dinged off, releasing the cabin from its tense silence. But before anyone could stand, 2 airport security officers stepped on board, moving quickly down the aisle toward Karen's seat. A hush fell over the crowd, passengers leaning in to watch as the officers approached her with calm, authoritative expressions. Karen's face flushed with a mix of defiance and panic as they arrived. She stiffened, lifting her chin. "You're making a mistake," she muttered under her breath. "I'm a paying customer. I have rights." One of the officers, a tall man with a calm but firm demeanor, ignored her protest, gesturing for her to stand. "Ma'am, we're here to escort you off the plane. Please come with us." Karen glared at them, casting one last look around the cabin. She could see the faces of her fellow passengers, some openly staring, others turning away with expressions of discomfort or quiet satisfaction. The young mother who had been seated across from her offered her a glance that was neither harsh nor mocking but simply disappointed. Karen's fury only deepened as she was led toward the exit. Her steps were heavy, her pride bruised, but her determination to hold onto her version of events remained as solid as ever. She muttered under her breath, glancing back at the flight crew, the passengers, anyone who would listen. "I'll be filing a complaint about this," she said, her voice louder, defiant. "This is far from over." But her words fell flat, met only with silence. One by one, the passengers turned away, the impact of her behavior leaving her to face the consequences alone. As Karen disappeared down the aisle with security, Jasmine and Frank exchanged a brief glance in the cockpit. Frank gave her an encouraging nod. "Handled like a pro," he said softly, admiration clear in his voice. Jasmine returned a small, grateful smile. Despite the storm she just navigated, in the air and on the ground she had remained steady, unshaken. With the final passengers disembarking, Jasmine stepped out of the cockpit, greeted by quiet nods and a few words of thanks. One man paused, nodding to her. "Thank you, Captain Rivers. You handled that with grace." Not sure many people could have done the same. Jasmine felt a swell of gratitude. "Thank you for your understanding," she replied warmly. "I'm just here to do my job." A few others, including the young mother with her son, stopped to thank her, sharing looks of appreciation and quiet pride. Jasmine knelt to speak directly to the little boy, offering him a warm smile. "Thank you for flying with us today," she said gently. "Maybe one day, you'll be up here flying too." The boy's eyes shone with excitement. "Can I be a pilot like you?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Jasmine chuckled softly. "Absolutely. You can be anything you want if you work hard for it." His mother offered Jasmine a grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given him someone incredible to look up to." As they left, Jasmine stood tall, feeling the weight of both responsibility and fulfillment. Each interaction left her with a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder of why she had pursued this path, and of the impact her resilience could have on others. In the airport terminal, a small crowd had gathered around the gate, some curious bystanders watching the aftermath of Karen's confrontation. Security officers were waiting, and cameras flashed as Karen was led through the terminal, her face a mask of defiance as she tried to ignore the cell phones capturing the spectacle. Flashes from nearby cameras lit up her path as she marched down the corridor, her face set in a mask of defiance. Reporters from nearby gates angled their phones to capture the scene, murmuring among themselves as Karen's voice rose in a shrill protest. "This is absurd. I was only trying to protect myself. They're treating me like a criminal." But her words fell on unsympathetic ears. A few passengers who had been on the flight shook their heads, some whispering to the people waiting for them, describing the scene with a mix of disbelief and disgust. One bystander, an older woman with silver hair and a compassionate gaze, watched as Karen passed, She shook her head slowly, murmuring to the person beside her. Some people just can't let go of their pride. It blinds them to everything. Meanwhile, Jasmine made her way through the terminal toward the crew lounge. As she walked, her phone vibrated with messages, friends, family, and colleagues who had already heard about the incident, some sending her words of encouragement and admiration. She was too exhausted to respond, but each message lifted her spirits, filling her with a quiet, steady pride. Sophia, who had rejoined her in the lounge, offered a tired but supportive smile. "Captain Rivers," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you. I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that with so much grace." She was something else. Jasmine chuckled softly, though there was a hint of weariness in her expression. "Just part of the job, I suppose. You handled it well too, Sophia. It's not easy to keep your cool in situations like that." Sophia nodded, her eyes warm with admiration. "You know, Captain, people like her, they're the loud ones, but they're not the ones who matter. You showed everyone what real professionalism looks like today." Jasmine's heart swelled at the words, the reminder that this moment, though difficult, had affirmed everything she believed in. She had stood her ground, not to prove anything to Karen, but to honor the years of effort, strength, and dedication that had brought her here. As she sat down with a cup of tea, Jasmine's phone vibrated again. This time, it was a message from her younger sister. "Tia just saw the video. You handled it like a queen. So proud of you." Jasmine allowed herself a moment to smile, feeling the warmth of her family's support surround her. She replied quickly, "Thanks, Tia. Just doing what I trained for." In the meantime, Karen sat in a small, sterile airport office, facing the airport security officer. Her anger had cooled to a bitter simmer, her expression a mixture of disbelief and frustration. The officer's calm, steady gaze made it clear that her usual defenses and defiance wouldn't work here. "Ma'am," he began, his voice level, "we've received multiple reports about disruptive and threatening behavior on the flight. We have witness statements and video evidence." Karen's face hardened, her voice defensive. "I was only trying to make sure everyone was safe. I had every right to question that pilot." The officer didn't waver. Disrupting a flight, verbally attacking the crew, and striking a flight attendant are serious offenses. You'll be notified of any further action. And until then, you're barred from flying with this airline." Karen's hands clenched in her lap, her face flushed with anger and a hint of fear. She opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself again, but the officer's steady gaze cut her off. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you need to accept the consequences of your actions." Outside, the terminal buzzed with activity as passengers shared their experiences with friends and family, some already posting clips of Karen's outburst online. The story spread quickly, fueled by hashtags and snippets of conversation. But amid the flurry of comments and shared footage, one sentiment emerged above all: admiration for the quiet strength and dignity of Captain Jasmine Rivers. Jasmine remained unaware of the viral attention as she left the airport, her mind already on her next flight, the next goal she would set for herself. Her journey had always been one of resilience, and each challenge she faced was another opportunity to rise. The ordeal with Karen had only deepened her resolve, strengthening her commitment to her work, her dreams, and the legacy she was building. As she walked toward the exit, a small group of airport staff gathered nearby, watching her with admiration. One of them, a young woman with wide, filled eyes, called out softly, "Captain Rivers, thank you. You're an inspiration."
Jasmine pauset.
Her gaze meeting the young woman's, she gave her a warm, genuine smile, offering a simple nod. "Thank you. Remember, hard work and resilience will take you anywhere you want to go." With that, she turned and stepped out into the cool evening air, breathing deeply as she took in the world around her. She knew her journey was far from over, but in this moment, she felt grounded, her heart steady with the strength of knowing she belonged exactly where she was. And for Karen, whose fall from grace would continue in the days to come, the lesson of this flight would echo as a reminder, a cautionary tale of pride and prejudice, and the strength it took to rise above both. The news of Karen's outburst spread like wildfire. Clips of her ranting at the flight crew, her defiant face flushed with indignation, and her final confrontation with security circulated across social media within hours. Users shared the video with hashtags like #Flight294 and #CaptainRivers, and within days, the incident became a nationwide topic of conversation. Thousands of people weighed in, some with shock, others with outrage. But one sentiment echoed loudly: respect and admiration for Captain Jasmine Rivers. For Karen, the backlash was swift and relentless. As she scrolled through her phone, her screen was flooded with comments. Her name tagged in hundreds of posts criticizing her behavior. She could feel her world shrinking with every notification, every comment that appeared beneath her social media posts. Friends, family, and acquaintances were distancing themselves, expressing their disapproval in subtle but unmistakable ways. Her phone buzzed again, and Karen glanced down, her face tightening as she read a message from her sister. "Karen, I don't know how you could behave that way. You've embarrassed the family. Please call me, but I don't know if I can forgive you for this." The words stung, hitting her with a wave of reality that she hadn't been prepared for. But instead of responding, Karen tossed her phone onto her coffee table and sank into her couch, staring at the wall in sullen silence. The following morning, Karen's employer, a prominent pharmaceutical company, sent her an email. The subject line alone made her stomach sink. Notice of immediate termination. She opened it with trembling fingers, reading the formal, terse message that spelled out her dismissal. Her company could not condone her behavior, and after reviewing the incident, they had decided to sever ties with her to protect their reputation. Her job, her livelihood gone. For the first time, Karen felt the full weight of her actions pressing down on her. The pride she had clung to so fiercely now felt hollow, a bitter shell that couldn't protect her from the reality of her situation. She was alone, her reputation in ruins, with no one to shield her from the consequences of her choices. Meanwhile, Jasmine's life was taking an unexpected turn. She hadn't anticipated the public response to the incident, but it seemed as though everyone had something to say about the calm, unbreakable pilot who had endured one passenger's barrage of hostility with grace and professionalism. She began receiving messages from strangers, fellow pilots, aspiring aviators, and even parents whose children had been inspired by her story. She read each one with a sense of humility, her heart swelling as she realized the impact her journey had made. At work, her superiors were quick to express their support. The airline's vice president, Angela Marshall, personally called her into the office for a meeting. "Captain Rivers," Angela began with a warm smile as Jasmine sat down across from her. "I just wanted to commend you personally. You've shown extraordinary professionalism, and the public has taken note. It's not easy dealing with situations like that, and you handled it in a way that makes us proud to have you as part of this airline." "Thank you, Ms. Marshall," Jasmine replied, her tone modest but grateful. "I was just doing my job." Angela leaned forward, her eyes shining with admiration. "We'd like to recognize you with an Excellence in Service Award, and we'll be announcing it publicly. The airline is also setting up an opportunity for you to speak at a few upcoming events, young pilot seminars, aviation forums. I think your story is one that people need to hear." Jasmine felt a mixture of honor and disbelief. "I'd be happy to," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for this opportunity." As she left the office, Jasmine felt lighter, filled with a sense of purpose. She had spent years overcoming obstacles in her career, facing both subtle and overt challenges, and now she had the chance to inspire others who might be walking similar paths. But Jasmine's story had gone beyond just the aviation community. News outlets began reaching out, requesting interviews and hoping to learn more about her journey and how she'd risen above Karen's harsh treatment. At first, Jasmine was hesitant. She had never sought the spotlight, and the idea of sharing her personal story on a large platform felt daunting. But after speaking with her family and friends, she realized this was an opportunity to be a voice for others. A week later, Jasmine found herself seated on the set of a popular morning show, facing a camera crew, a host, and a live studio audience. She'd carefully prepared for this moment, though her heart still pounded with a mix of excitement and nerves. The host, a kind-eyed woman with a genuine smile, introduced Jasmine to the audience. "We have Captain Jasmine Rivers with us today," she said. "The pilot who's been praised for her incredible professionalism during a difficult incident on Flight 294. Captain Rivers, thank you for joining us." Jasmine nodded, smiling modestly. "Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. The host leaned forward, her expression earnest. Jasmine, can you tell us what was going through your mind that day? How did you manage to stay so calm under such intense scrutiny? Jasmine took a steadying breath. For me, it's always been about responsibility. She began. As a pilot, I have a duty to ensure the safety and comfort of my passengers, no matter what personal challenges I might face. That day, I reminded myself that I was there to do my job. I've worked hard to get here, and no one's opinion is going to take that from me. The audience erupted in applause, and Jasmine's heart swelled as she saw the faces around her. Faces filled with admiration and pride. The host continued, asking about her journey, the challenges she'd faced as a woman of color in a male-dominated field, and what it meant to her to see so many people inspired by her story. For those who may face prejudice in their own careers, the host asked, what advice would you give them? Jasmine's gaze softened, and she spoke from the heart. I tell them to keep going. No matter what, there will always be people who try to undermine you or doubt your abilities. But their opinions don't define you. What defines you is how you respond, how you keep pushing forward, and how you prove to yourself that you're capable. Stay true to your goals and remember, you belong where you are. The applause was thunderous, and Jasmine felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her words had resonated with so many. She was no longer just a pilot. She had become a symbol of resilience and strength. Her story a beacon for anyone who had ever been made to feel as though they didn't belong. Back at home, Karen watched the interview in sullen silence, a mixture of anger and bitterness twisting within her. Each word from Jasmine felt like salt on an open wound, a reminder of her own disgrace. Yet, even as she tried to ignore it, a small part of her began to question everything. Had she truly been in the right, or had her pride blinded her to her own actions? As the days passed, Karen found it harder to escape the reality of her situation. The fallout from the flight had tainted her reputation in ways she hadn't expected. Friends had stopped returning her calls. Colleagues distanced themselves, and even her family seemed hesitant to reach out. With no job, no support, and a tarnished name, she was left to face the consequences of her own behavior in a stark, unforgiving light. In a moment of reflection, Karen found herself searching for Jasmine's contact information online. She hesitated, staring at her screen, 1,000 thoughts swirling in her mind. She couldn't bring herself to reach out. Not yet. The words she wanted to say felt foreign, unfamiliar, but there was a nagging feeling in her chest that she couldn't shake. Meanwhile, Jasmine's life continued to bloom. She was now a sought-after speaker, her story shared on panels, podcasts, and at aviation conferences where she encouraged young people to pursue their dreams. Each speech, each interaction, reminded her of her purpose, not just to fly, but to be a voice for others who, like her, had faced doubt and prejudice. She had become a role model, inspiring a generation to break boundaries and reach new heights. As she stood before a classroom of young, aspiring pilots one afternoon, she looked into their eager faces and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Her journey had been long and challenging, but every struggle, every setback had led her to this moment. You're all capable of greatness, she told them, her voice steady. No matter who doubts you, no matter what obstacles you face, remember that you have a right to be here. Believe in yourself, work hard, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. And with that, Jasmine knew that her journey had truly come full circle. She had faced prejudice, risen above it, and used her story to inspire change. And while Karen was left grappling with the consequences of her actions, Jasmine had found peace, strength, and a legacy that would continue to inspire others for years to come. Months had passed since the incident on Flight 294, and the media storm had mostly quieted. But while Jasmine's life continued to soar to new heights, Karen's life had only grown smaller. She had moved to a modest apartment in a less affluent neighborhood, forced to let go of the luxuries she once took for granted. With each passing day, she felt the weight of her choices press down harder, her pride slowly chipping away. Karen's job search had been fruitless. Employers looked at her resume with interest, but as soon as her name was searched, they became wary, dismissive. The viral videos from the flight had cemented her as that disruptive passenger, and the negative association left her practically unemployable. Even her closest friends had distanced themselves, quietly embarrassed by her behavior. One rainy afternoon, Karen sat alone in her small living room, scrolling through her phone. She opened her social media accounts, which she had set to private months ago, but the messages of disappointment and criticism still lingered in her notifications. Friends who had once supported her were now painfully silent, and family members, usually so loving, had gently suggested she take a hard look at her behavior. Her hand hovered over Jasmine's public profile, and with a few taps, she began scrolling through recent posts. Jasmine's photos captured her standing confidently at speaking events, receiving awards, and shaking hands with people who admired her. The comments beneath each post were filled with admiration, praise, and gratitude. Karen's chest tightened, a mixture of regret and a creeping sense of shame washing over her. The pride she'd held onto for so long felt empty now, and she could no longer ignore the reality she'd created for herself. As she sat there, her thoughts turned to an idea that had been lurking in the back of her mind. A letter. She knew it wouldn't erase the past, but perhaps it would bring her a measure of peace. She took a deep breath, reached for a notebook and pen, and began to write. Dear Captain Rivers, I don't expect you to read this, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I feel I owe you an apology, and maybe an explanation, even if it's too little, too late. I don't know what came over me on that flight. At the time, I truly believed I was right, but now I see how blind I was to my own prejudice. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment, and I disrespected you in a way that no one deserves, especially someone who has worked as hard as you have. Seeing you stand strong in the face of my hostility, I realize now that my behavior reflected my own insecurities, my own need to feel in control. I never stopped to consider how my actions would affect you or the passengers around me. I was selfish, and I see that now. I'm not proud of what I did, and I'm paying for it in ways I never anticipated. But the consequences are mine to bear, and I accept that. Please know that I am deeply sorry for everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I am truly, genuinely remorseful. Sincerely, Karen Thompson. Karen finished the letter, staring at the words until her vision blurred. A part of her felt lighter, as though the admission of guilt had lifted a weight off her shoulders. She knew Jasmine might never read it, but writing the words down felt like a necessary first step. The next day, she took the letter to the post office, sending it with no expectation of a response. She walked out into the bright afternoon, feeling as though, for the first time in months, she could breathe again. Jasmine received the letter a week later. She sat alone in her quiet apartment, a cup of tea in hand. As she unfolded the pages and read Karen's words, a mix of emotions washed over her. Surprise, compassion, and, above all, relief that Karen had recognized the harm she'd caused. She didn't need the apology to move forward. She'd already made peace with the incident. But the letter felt like closure, a reminder that her response on that flight had left an impact beyond the initial turbulence. She folded the letter and placed it in her drawer, letting a sense of quiet resolve settle over her. In the months that followed, Karen took further steps to rebuild her life. She began volunteering at a local community center, helping with food drives and mentoring young people. The work was humbling, and it reminded her that respect was something earned, not demanded. She no longer felt entitled to admiration. Instead, she felt grateful for every small opportunity to make a positive impact, even if it went unnoticed. One day, while helping a group of teens at the center with a community cleanup project, a young girl named Alicia approached her. "Miss Karen, do you think it's hard to become a pilot?" Alicia asked, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. Karen's chest tightened, the memory of Jasmine fresh in her mind. She knelt down, meeting Alicia's gaze. It's not easy, Alicia. Takes a lot of hard work and dedication. But if you want it, don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it. The girl's face lit up. I want to be like Captain Rivers. She's my hero. Karen smiled, feeling a pang of both regret and admiration. Then go for it, Alicia. And remember, being strong means standing tall, even when others doubt you. The words felt like a small redemption, a chance to rewrite her story in a way that aligned with the values she had come to respect. She realized then that her journey toward redemption wasn't about being perfect. It was about learning, growing, and helping others find the courage to follow their dreams. Meanwhile, Jasmine's life continued to flourish. Her career was at an all-time high, and she had become a beacon for young women and people of color in the aviation industry. She continued to speak at conferences, mentor young pilots, and share her story with those who looked to her for inspiration. At one event, a young woman approached her, clutching a small notebook. "Captain Rivers," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "I just want to say thank you. I read about your story, and it made me believe that I could do this, too." Jasmine smiled, her heart filled with gratitude. "You absolutely can," she replied. "Remember, it's not about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you belong. Stay true to your path, and you'll go far." The woman nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Thank you. I'll remember that." As Jasmine left the event, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her journey had brought her to a place of purpose and peace, a place where she could uplift others and help them overcome the same challenges she had faced. That evening, she returned home and reread Karen's letter. She felt a sense of closure, knowing that even the most painful experiences could be transformed into lessons of growth and resilience. In the end, Jasmine had chosen to rise above, to let her strength define her rather than the prejudice she had faced. And Karen, in her own way, had taken the first steps toward a new beginning, one rooted in humility and understanding. Both women had been changed by Flight 294, each finding a different path to redemption. For Yasmin, it was a testament to the power of resilience, and for Karen, a reminder of the grace that comes with facing one's own flaws. And though their paths would likely never cross again, the impact of that day would linger, a story of strength, growth, and the quiet redemption found in moments of reflection and change. Jasmine stood by the large, floor-to-ceiling windows of the airport terminal, gazing out at the runway as planes taxied and took flight. It was a scene she had witnessed countless times, but today felt different. Today marked her first flight as an officially recognized mentor within the airline, a role she hadn't anticipated, but one she had come to embrace. The airline had introduced a mentorship program aimed at guiding young pilots, especially women and minorities, to break through the barriers she herself had faced. Jasmine would be leading the program, shaping a new generation of aviators. As she waited, she was approached by a young woman with wide, eager eyes, carrying a notebook and pen in her hands. The girl was dressed in her trainee pilot uniform, her gaze shifting between admiration and nerves as she met Jasmine's eyes. "Captain Rivers," she began, her voice filled with excitement and a hint of awe. "I'm Elena Garcia, one of your ments. It's an honor to meet you." Jasmine extended her hand with a warm smile. "The honor is mine, Elena. I'm thrilled to have you here. Let's take this journey together." Elena's face lit up, and she looked over her shoulder at the other trainees who had gathered nearby, all of them buzzing with anticipation. Jasmine walked toward the group, welcoming each of them and introducing herself with a natural, calming confidence. She could see their excitement, their passion for flying, and it reminded her of her own journey, the years of struggle, the relentless persistence, the desire to belong. Today, she was no longer the outsider proving herself. She was the role model who showed others that they, too, could soar. "All right, everyone," she began, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "I know each of you is here because you've worked hard to be here. This journey won't be easy, and you'll face challenges. But the most important thing is to believe in yourselves. You belong here, and nothing, no judgment, no prejudice, can take that away from you." The group listened intently, their expressions shifting from eagerness to determination. Each word felt like a thread, connecting Jasmine's experiences with theirs, weaving a tapestry of resilience and shared purpose. One trainee, a young black woman named Mia, raised her hand. "Captain Rivers," she said, her voice steady but earnest. "How do you handle the moments when people question whether you deserve to be here? How do you stay strong?" Jasmine took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Mia's. "You'll face moments that make you question yourself. But remember, you're here because you've earned it. I always told myself that every obstacle, every judgment, was just another test. The most important thing is to stay focused on your goals. Prove to yourself that you deserve it, and no one else's opinion will matter." The group nodded, their eyes reflecting a new sense of confidence. And Jasmine felt a wave of pride as she watched them. They were standing on the threshold of their own journeys, each of them carrying the potential to break barriers and redefine what was possible. As Jasmine's first mentoring session ended, she watched the young trainees head toward their first flights, their laughter and chatter filling the air. She felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. She knew that her work, her story, was no longer just about her. It was about them, about the doors she could help open. Meanwhile, Karen's journey had taken her to a different place. Months of reflection, volunteer work, and sensitivity training had given her new perspective. But the consequences of her actions still lingered. She had applied to countless jobs, only to be rejected time and again. The isolation and the public scrutiny had forced her to confront herself in ways she hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, she found herself back at the community center, helping organize a youth workshop. It was here she felt a sense of belonging, even if it was small. Today, the young girl Alicia, whom she had met earlier, returned to the center with a bright, eager smile. "Miss Karen," Alicia called, waving as she approached. "I've been practicing like you said. And guess what? I got to sit in a real cockpit last weekend." Karen's face softened with genuine warmth, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. "That's amazing, Alicia. I'm so proud of you. Keep working hard. And one day, you'll be flying those planes." Alicia nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling. "Do you think I'll get to meet Captain Rivers one day?" The mention of Jasmine's name sent a pang through Karen's chest, a reminder of everything she had once resisted but now admired. She took a deep breath, her voice softening. "I hope so, Alicia. Captain Rivers is someone worth looking up to." The workshop continued, and Karen found herself offering words of encouragement, guiding the young girls with a gentler, more understanding perspective, though she still carried the weight of her past mistakes. Each small act of kindness felt like a step toward something new, something better. As the afternoon drew to a close, the community center director approached her with an unexpected offer. "Karen, we've noticed how dedicated you've been with the youth programs here. We'd love for you to take on a more formal role, maybe lead some of our youth workshops. Think about it." Karen felt a strange mix of surprise and gratitude. For the first time in months, someone was offering her a chance. Not despite her past, but because they believed she could help others avoid the same mistakes. "Thank you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I'd like that." Jasmine's work with her mentor grew over the weeks, and her influence expanded beyond the airline. She received invitations to speak at schools, conferences, and community centers, each event allowing her to connect with people who saw her as a symbol of resilience. One afternoon, she visited a high school in her hometown. As she stood before a gym full of students, she looked out at the young faces watching her, and she felt a familiar sense of nervousness. But as she began to speak, the nerves faded, replaced by the confidence of her journey. "You don't have to be perfect," she told the students, her voice carrying the wisdom of her own experiences. "You just have to be persistent. There will be people who doubt you, and there will be moments when you doubt yourself. But each challenge is just a stepping stone. You have the power to turn every no into fuel for your journey. Stand tall, even when it feels hard, and know that you belong." The students listened, captivated, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. After the talk, a line of students formed, each of them eager to shake her hand, ask a question, or simply thank her. Jasmine took her time with each one, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. As she exited the school, she received a message from her sister. "Tia, just watched your speech online. Amazing as always. Mom and Dad are so proud of you. Keep making us proud." Jasmine smiled, a warmth settling over her. She had found her calling, a purpose that went beyond her career. She was helping others find their own paths, guiding them to believe in themselves in the same way she had fought to believe in herself. For Karen, redemption was a slower, quieter process. Her life was different now, simpler, with fewer people and fewer luxuries. But each day, she found herself feeling a little more grateful for the chance to rebuild. The community center had become a place of solace, a space where she could contribute and help others. One evening, as she was locking up after a workshop, her phone buzzed. It was an email from an unfamiliar address. Opening it, she saw it was from the airline, notifying her that her restrictions had been lifted following her completion of sensitivity training and her commitment to community service. She stared at the message, her heart heavy with mixed emotions. It wasn't forgiveness or validation, it was a second chance, an opportunity to choose a different path. Karen typed a response. "Thank you. I don't deserve this, but I'll honor it." With that, she shut her phone off and looked around the community center, feeling a quiet sense of peace. Jasmine and Karen's paths would likely never cross again, but each woman had taken something from their encounter. Jasmine had learned that her strength could inspire others, her journey a beacon for those facing their own battles. And Karen had faced the painful but necessary truth about herself, choosing to seek change in the aftermath. Both women had taken flight in different ways. Jasmine, a trailblazer in the skies, and Karen, finding a new purpose in the small but meaningful acts of service that filled her days. The journey of redemption, Jasmine knew, was not always a clear path, but she hoped that one day Karen would find the same peace she had found. As Jasmine prepared for her next flight, surrounded by her mentor, she looked out at the runway and felt an unwavering sense of pride. She had overcome, and now, she was helping others do the same. For her, the horizon was limitless, a testament to resilience, grace, and the power to rise above. And for Karen, the horizon was a quiet reminder, a chance to rebuild, to make amends, and to live a life defined not by past mistakes but by the courage to face them. In their own ways, each woman had found a new horizon, shaped by the journey that began on Flight 294. Jasmine stood at the front of the crowded hall, her voice steady and resonant as she addressed the room. This was no ordinary gathering, it was the annual aviation conference, where industry professionals, pioneers, and young hopefuls gathered to exchange ideas, celebrate achievements, and envision the future of flight. Jasmine had been invited as the keynote speaker, an honor she hadn't anticipated but one she had accepted with pride. As she looked out at the audience, a sea of faces filled with admiration and curiosity, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey from that pivotal flight had been filled with growth, opportunities, and the chance to shape the aviation industry from within. But today wasn't about her, it was about everyone who would come after, the ones who would push boundaries and rise above limitations just as she had. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying a warmth that drew everyone in. "When I began my career, I never thought I'd be standing here. I wanted to fly, to break through clouds and explore the sky. But I faced moments when I was told that this wasn't my place. But I'm here to tell you that everyone has a place in this industry. No matter who you are or where you come from, your dreams are valid, and your journey is yours to shape." The audience listened in rapt attention as she spoke of resilience, of finding strength in the face of doubt, and of never letting anyone define her limits. As she looked out, she could see young men and women nodding, their expressions shifting from awe to determination. She knew that, For them, her story was more than just an example. It was proof that they, too, could belong here. After her speech, a standing ovation filled the hall, and Jasmine felt a rush of gratitude. People approached her, young pilots in training and seasoned veterans alike, thanking her for her words, for her strength, and for her willingness to break barriers. One by one, she shook their hands, each exchange a reminder of the legacy she was building. Back in her modest apartment, Karen sat at her kitchen table, her fingers hovering over her laptop. She had been keeping up with Jasmine's journey through social media, quietly watching as her former antagonist grew into an inspirational figure. Each post, each story, felt like a subtle reminder of the path Karen had once resisted but now admired. Since her letter to Jasmine, Karen had thrown herself into her community work, determined to make amends in any way she could. She continued leading workshops at the community center, her life now centered around giving back rather than seeking recognition. She had found purpose in the small acts, the moments when she could guide young people, offer them advice, and remind them to believe in themselves. But even as she grew in her new role, she couldn't shake the lingering sense that she had unfinished business. That evening, she noticed an announcement online. Jasmine would be speaking at an upcoming event in her city. Her heart raced. The thought of seeing Jasmine again, of hearing her speak and, perhaps, having the chance to thank her in person, filled her with both excitement and trepidation. But Karen knew that this was something she needed to do, a final step in her journey of redemption. A week later, Karen entered the conference hall. A bundle of nerves. She felt out of place, unsure of what to expect. But as she looked around, she saw young people from all backgrounds, each one filled with a hopeful energy that reminded her of her own journey, though it had been marked by missteps. She was finally finding her way. Jasmine's speech began, and Karen listened, captivated. Jasmine spoke with conviction, her voice calm yet powerful as she shared stories of resilience, of finding strength even in the darkest moments. Karen felt each word deeply, like a message crafted just for her, reminding her that change was possible, that it was never too late to become better. As the speech concluded and applause filled the room, Karen stood among the crowd, her hands clapping as she felt a wave of admiration for Jasmine. She stayed in her spot as the crowd began to thin, unsure if she should approach. But then, as if by fate, Jasmine's eyes met hers across the room. Jasmine's expression shifted slightly, a glimmer of recognition in her eyes. Karen swallowed, gathering her courage as she walked forward, her heart pounding with each step. When she finally reached Jasmine, she opened her mouth to speak but found herself at a loss for words. Jasmine gave her a gentle smile, sensing Karen's unease. "Hello," she said softly, her tone open and calm. Karen took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "Captain Rivers, I just wanted to say thank you, not only for today, but for everything. I know I can never undo what happened, but I want you to know that I've been working to change. You've inspired me in ways I never thought possible." Jasmine's eyes softened, her smile warm but understanding. "Thank you, Karen," she replied, her tone genuine. "I appreciate you coming here, and I'm glad to hear that you're finding a new path." The two women stood in silence for a moment, each of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point.
For Yasmin,
It was a reminder that even the most painful experiences could become opportunities for growth. And for Karen, it was a quiet release, a final acceptance of the change she had worked so hard to embrace. "Take care, Karen," Jasmine said, her voice filled with sincerity. Karen nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders as she turned to leave. Feeling lighter than she had in months, she knew that this was not the end of her journey, but it was a milestone, a moment of closure she hadn't thought possible. In the months that followed, Jasmine continued to thrive, her influence spreading as she took on more mentorship roles and public speaking opportunities. She received letters from young pilots around the world, each one sharing how her story had encouraged them to keep going, to push past the barriers they faced. Each message reminded her that she was part of something larger than herself, a movement toward inclusion, resilience, and progress. One afternoon, she received a handwritten note in her mailbox. It was from Karen, a simple letter expressing gratitude and a brief update on her work at the community center. Karen wrote that she had recently helped organize a program for young girls interested in aviation, and that each day, she thought of Jasmine's strength as a guide. Jasmine read the letter with a quiet smile, folding it carefully and placing it among her collection of letters from students and ments. In the end, she had learned that true strength was not just about overcoming adversity but about inspiring others to find their own strength, even if their journeys had once diverged. The story of Flight 294 had become something of a legend, shared within the aviation community as a testament to resilience and the power of rising above prejudice. Jasmine's legacy continued to grow, her name known to young pilots who looked up to her as a pioneer, a role model, and a symbol of what was possible. As for Karen, her life had taken a quieter path, but one filled with purpose and a commitment to personal growth. She dedicated her time to helping others, offering guidance to young people who, like her, had once struggled to find their way. Each act of kindness, each small effort to support others, felt like a step toward redemption, a chance to rebuild her life on a foundation of humility and understanding. In the end, their lives had intertwined in a way neither of them had anticipated. Jasmine and Karen had both found peace. Though their journeys had been different, they had become symbols of resilience and redemption, showing that even in moments of conflict, growth and transformation were possible. As Jasmine prepared for her next flight, she looked out at the runway, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment. She had overcome, inspired, and helped others rise alongside her. Her story was no longer just her own, it was a shared legacy, a reminder to everyone who heard it that they, too, could find strength in the face of adversity and rise above. And for Karen, each day was a new chapter, a chance to live with purpose and integrity. She had found redemption not in grand gestures but in the quiet, steady work of becoming a better person. And as she moved forward, she carried with her a sense of humility, a reminder of the lessons she had learned and the woman she had become. In their own ways, Jasmine and Karen had discovered that true resilience wasn't just about rising above. It was about lifting others as they soared, leaving a legacy of courage, grace, and transformation for those who would follow. A gentle breeze swept across the runway as Jasmine stepped onto the tarmac, the vast sky stretching overhead, the sun casting a warm glow across the morning. She took a deep breath, savoring the air, the sound of engines revving up in the distance, and the sight of her plane waiting for her like a familiar, trusted friend. Today, however, was special not only because she was scheduled to pilot a new route, but because she was accompanied by a young mentee, Elena, who was preparing for her first co-piloted flight. Elena had come a long way since Jasmine first met her at the mentorship program. Once shy and hesitant, she now wore her own uniform with a confidence that reflected months of dedicated training. As they walked together across the tarmac, Jasmine could see the determination in Elena's eyes, a look she remembered from her own early days as a young pilot. "Are you ready for this?" Jasmine asked, giving Elena an encouraging smile. Elena nodded, though her voice held a touch of awe. "More than ready. It's surreal, being here, with you. I never thought I'd get this far." Jasmine chuckled, patting Elena on the shoulder. "Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about perseverance. You earned your place here, and you belong just as much as anyone." They boarded the plane together, preparing for the pre-flight checks. Jasmine could feel Elena's excitement radiating beside her, and it reminded her of how far she had come. Today was not just about her journey but about paving the way for others, ensuring that young women like Elena felt the confidence to pursue their dreams without hesitation. As they worked through the checks, Jasmine noticed the reflection of her co-pilot in the glass. Her own journey, filled with moments of doubt and resilience, had brought her to this place where she could guide others. And watching Elena, she realized that she was fulfilling a dream she hadn't even known she had, creating a path for the next generation to walk on. Meanwhile, Karen's life had settled into a quiet but fulfilling rhythm. After embracing her role at the community center, she had continued mentoring young people, finding joy in guiding them through their own struggles. Her past mistakes remained, but they no longer defined her. She had made peace with herself, accepting that growth was a continuous journey rather than a destination. One afternoon, Karen was leading a workshop on setting goals with a group of teenagers, most of whom were from underprivileged backgrounds. She spoke candidly about the importance of resilience, of learning from mistakes rather than letting them consume you. Life is going to test you, she said, her voice calm and steady. Sometimes, you'll feel like you don't belong or that others are judging you. But every setback is a chance to grow. You have to keep going and prove to yourself that you're worth it, even if it takes time. After the session, a young girl with bright eyes approached Karen, holding a worn notebook. "Miss Karen, do you think it's possible for me to become a pilot one day?" Karen's heart warmed, and she knelt down to meet the girl's gaze. "Absolutely," she replied, smiling. "You can do anything if you put your heart into it. Remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about being persistent. Keep that in mind, and one day, you'll soar." In that moment, Karen felt a sense of fulfillment that no job or title could ever bring. She knew her path was different from the one she'd originally envisioned, but it was one filled with purpose, a path where her own story served as a guiding light for others. Back in the cockpit, Jasmine guided Elena through each step of the takeoff procedure, her voice steady and reassuring. As they ascended into the clouds, the thrill of the flight pulsed through both women, the vast expanse of sky unfolding before them. Once they reached cruising altitude, Jasmine turned to Elena, her face reflecting pride and warmth. "How does it feel, seeing the world from up here?" Elena's eyes shone with excitement as she gazed out at the endless sky. "It feels freeing, like nothing else matters. I never thought I'd be able to do this." Jasmine nodded, her gaze softening as she looked out at the horizon. "When I was starting out, I faced so many obstacles, people who doubted me, setbacks that made me question everything. But every time I looked out at this view, I reminded myself that this was worth fighting for. And it is every single time." Elena looked at her mentor with newfound admiration, her expression serious. "Thank you, Captain Rivers, for everything. I'm here because of you." Jasmine felt a lump in her throat, but she managed to smile. "You're here because of your own hard work, Elena. I just helped you see what was already possible." The rest of the flight passed smoothly, and as they descended, Jasmine felt a deep satisfaction settle over her. She had watched Elena grow from a trainee into a confident young pilot, and she knew that this moment, seeing her mentee succeed, was as fulfilling as any award or accolade. After landing, Jasmine received a message from a former mentor who had heard about her recent successes. They were organizing a celebration in her honor, and she was invited to speak to a room filled with young women and minority pilots. All eager to learn from her story, Jasmine accepted, knowing that this was not just about her achievements, it was about sharing her journey to inspire others to push through their own obstacles. The evening of the event arrived, and Jasmine stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and pride. She looked out at the audience, seeing faces of all ages and backgrounds, each one reflecting the same spark of ambition she had once carried. "My journey wasn't easy," she began, her voice steady. "I faced moments when I wanted to give up, times when I questioned whether I belonged. But every challenge was a stepping stone. And I want you all to know that your path will have its own struggles. But that's what makes it meaningful. Remember, you are here because you've earned it. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve your dreams." As she spoke, the audience sat in rapt attention, captivated by her words. And when the applause rose, Jasmine felt a surge of fulfillment, knowing that her legacy would live on through each person she had touched. She had broken barriers not only for herself but for those who would come after. Her story a beacon for anyone who had ever felt like an outsider. Across the city, Karen sat in her small apartment, watching a live stream of Jasmine's speech. She listened intently, feeling the power of Jasmine's words, the grace that had defined her journey. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that her own path, while different, had led her to a place of redemption and purpose. After the speech ended, Karen sent Jasmine a message, a brief but heartfelt note thanking her for the impact she had made, not only on Karen's life but on the lives of so many others. She knew Jasmine might not respond, but that wasn't the point. This was her way of acknowledging the growth she had achieved and expressing her gratitude for the lessons she had learned. Jasmine received the message later that evening, and she read it with a soft smile. She didn't need to reply. The message itself was a testament to how far they had both come. As she looked out at the night sky, Jasmine felt a sense of peace. Her legacy wasn't just the miles she had flown or the titles she had earned. It was the people she had inspired, the dreams she had encouraged, and the lives she had touched along the way. She had transformed her journey into something greater than herself, a ripple of resilience and hope that would continue long after she was gone. Karen, too, found comfort in knowing that her life, though marked by mistakes, had found a new purpose. She had made peace with her past, embracing the work she did at the community center as a way to give back, to guide others toward a better future. Her redemption had been a quiet one, but it was one she wore with pride. As both women looked toward their respective horizons, they knew that their paths had been forever changed by that fateful day on Flight 294. They had each faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and learned to rise above the weight of judgment and doubt. And in doing so, they had created legacies that would inspire others to find their own strength, their own purpose. In the end, Jasmine and Karen's stories were woven together, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the power of change. They had both taken flight in their own ways, soaring into new lives shaped by growth, forgiveness, and the courage to keep moving forward. The airport hummed with its usual bustle as Jasmine prepared for what would be her final flight of the year, a special holiday route that had become a favorite among passengers and crew alike. The atmosphere was different tonight, filled with the warmth and excitement of the season, and the terminal was alive with families, couples, and solo travelers, all headed to reunite with loved ones. Jasmine watched them as she waited for her boarding call, a smile tugging at her lips. This flight would be one to remember. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Captain Rivers?" Jasmine turned to see her mentee, Elena, standing nearby, her face lighting up with excitement. She hadn't expected to see her here. Not today. "Elena, what are you doing here?" Jasmine asked, her surprise evident. Elena grinned, holding up her flight badge. "Guess who's your co-pilot tonight?" Jasmine felt a rush of pride. This flight, one that symbolized joy and connection, would be Elena's first official flight as a certified co-pilot. Together, they would soar through the night, a moment that marked the culmination of Elena's hard work and Jasmine's legacy as a mentor. They exchanged a quick hug before heading to the gate. As they boarded the plane, Jasmine noticed passengers settling into their seats, chatting excitedly, and helping each other with luggage. She walked down the aisle, greeting each passenger warmly, feeling the energy in the air shift as her presence set a calm, reassuring tone. She wanted them to know that they were in safe hands. As they neared takeoff, Jasmine and Elena settled into the cockpit, their pre-flight checks running smoothly. Jasmine glanced over at Elena, who was focused but visibly excited, her hands steady on the controls. Jasmine's heart swelled with pride, realizing that this moment wasn't just the result of their shared work. It was a testament to the power of believing in oneself and supporting others to do the same. Meanwhile, across town, Karen sat in her modest apartment, scrolling through her phone. She had no particular plans for the evening, and although she had been invited to a gathering at the community center, she found herself drawn to a quiet night at home. Her thoughts drifted back to Jasmine, to the countless moments of reflection that had brought her to this place of contentment. Karen had grown comfortable in the quiet joy of her new life. Her work at the community center had blossomed into something deeply meaningful, and the relationships she'd built there had given her a renewed sense of purpose. She spent her days guiding young people, teaching them to believe in themselves, to recognize their potential, and, perhaps most importantly, to show kindness and humility. Just as she put her phone down, a text appeared on her screen from a colleague at the community center. "Hey, Karen, you have to see this. Captain Rivers is flying tonight's holiday route. Tune in to the live stream." Curious, Karen tapped the link, and a live feed appeared on her screen showing scenes from the airport. Passengers shared stories, showing photos of loved ones they were excited to see, and there was a quick clip of Jasmine and Elena, both smiling confidently in the cockpit. Karen watched, captivated, as the camera followed Jasmine's flight crew through pre-takeoff preparations. A wave of warmth and nostalgia washed over her as she recalled her own journey, the mistakes she had made, and the path to redemption she had since embraced. Watching Jasmine now, seeing her embodying grace, strength, and professionalism, Karen felt both pride and peace. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the live feed switched to an inside view of the cabin. A flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone and inviting passengers to share their holiday wishes. One by one, passengers took turns expressing their hopes, dreams, and messages of love to those waiting for them. A little boy clutched his mother's hand and whispered, "I wish my dad could come back from his work overseas." An elderly woman in the back murmured, "I just want to hold my granddaughter for the first time." And a young couple beamed as they announced their hope for a peaceful holiday together. Watching, Karen felt her heart swell, touched by the shared dreams of these strangers. It was a reminder that everyone carried their own hopes, their own struggles, and that a single flight, a moment in the sky, could mean so much more than just getting from one place to another. In the cockpit, Jasmine and Elena were focused as they ascended into the night sky. The cabin lights dimmed, casting a warm, soft glow, and the holiday decorations along the aisles twinkled like stars. The sky outside was dark, yet clear, and the vast expanse of stars stretched endlessly ahead, each one a tiny point of light in the boundless universe. As they leveled out, Jasmine turned to Elena, her tone gentle yet firm. "You know, when I first started, I never imagined I'd be here one day, guiding someone like you. But I learned that every person we encounter on this journey has something to teach us." Elena smiled, her voice steady. "I'm honored to be here with you, Captain Rivers. You've taught me that dreams are worth pursuing, no matter how hard the road might seem." Jasmine's gaze softened as she looked out at the stars. "You'll do the same for others one day, Elena. That's how we create change, by lifting each other up." The flight continued peacefully, the plane gliding smoothly through the night. Jasmine and Elena occasionally exchanged words, sharing small stories and moments of encouragement.
For Yasmin,
This flight wasn't just a job. It was a celebration of everything she had worked for and a reminder of the legacy she was building. Karen continued watching the live feed, smiling as she listened to passengers share their holiday wishes. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet conviction to continue her work with the same dedication that Jasmine displayed. She thought of the young people at the community center, the dreams she now supported instead of hindered, and realized that her own journey had found meaning in ways she had never imagined. As the plane began its descent, Karen watched intently. The live feed returned to the cockpit, where Jasmine and Elena prepared for landing. There was a serene look on Jasmine's face, an expression of calm and fulfillment. Karen knew that Jasmine's journey hadn't been easy, and she felt a deep respect for the woman who had shown her, through her actions, what true strength looked like. As the plane touched down, the passengers erupted in cheers and applause. Jasmine and Elena exchanged a triumphant glance, both feeling the rush of accomplishment and the warmth of shared purpose.
For Yasmin,
This wasn't just another landing, it was a moment of connection, a reminder of why she had chosen this path and the lives she had touched along the way. That night, as Jasmine exited the airport, she was met with a cool, crisp breeze. She felt the weight of her journey, the highs and lows, and the quiet moments of strength that had brought her here. She glanced up at the night sky, feeling a deep gratitude for the life she had built, the people she had inspired, and the dreams she had helped set in motion. At home, Karen looked out her window at the same night sky. She took a deep breath, a sense of peace settling over her as she reflected on her journey, her mistakes, and the growth she had fought to achieve. She was no longer defined by her past but by the lives she now touched and the dreams she helped nurture. In their own way, both women looked out at the stars, their paths forever entwined by that fateful flight. Their lives had taken different turns, but each had found a new purpose, a legacy that extended beyond themselves. They had both become beacons of resilience, symbols of what it meant to rise above one's past and reach for something greater. And as they looked out into the vast night sky, they knew that their journeys, though marked by challenges, were part of something bigger, an endless sky filled with dreams, a world of possibility waiting to be explored, and a future shaped by the strength to rise above. The flight of dreams had come full circle, a testament to redemption, resilience, and the quiet, unstoppable power of hope.